Hello, everyone. I'm Norman Bolter. It is December 21st, 2022, the solstice, the winter solstice. So happy solstice to everyone. It's an interesting time. There's interesting frequencies coming into it. And this is going to be an interesting video. And it's Frequency Bone Music Connection. This is the last one of the fall edition. Because actually today is technically winter. And this question is the last one in the Ask Me Anything series. Okay? And it comes from Edzana Maria Evans. She asked me a question that actually has profound implications in it. And her question, I'm going to read it exactly, is this. How do you help kids understand theory/language of music as fluently as they do their first language? How do you help kids understand how do you help kids understand theory language of music as fluently as they do their first language? Now, with questing with this question, I asked myself, well, how does anyone learn language? Okay? You can go to school and start learning a language, a second language, which means, where's the first language come from? Inside the house. Hearing parents, hearing grandparents, hearing maybe older siblings speak the language that everyone is speaking. Now, it's interesting, and my wife has a similar situation as well. Dr. V is when my mother and grandparents got together to speak, and they didn't want the kids to understand anything, they spoke Yiddish, which is not Hebrew. It's actually taken from German, but it's Yiddish. It's part of Hebrew culture, Jewish culture. You can look it up and find out the history about it. It's a really interesting language. It's one of those languages to me that captures the essence of the thing it's talking about in sound. I mean, what better word is there for craziness than Meshiggah? For example. And there's some crossover into Germany for sure with Yiddish. Every time they were talking about my younger brother Neil, they would say the Kleine, youngest. So I picked up words, but they weren't speaking it to us. So then we'd have to think about it and answer. They did it as kind of we're going to speak in this language. And once in a while, my uncle would come in and just turn it into speaking Pig Latin, which was a funny form of language. I don't remember it that well, but ixnay, uxnay, you put something like that at the end of of regular words. So I grew up hearing Yiddish, but in terms of my own communication and the way my parents dealt with me was and grandparents was through English. And I wish I'd learned Yiddish. And the same thing happened with my wife with Portuguese. Her parents spoke fluent Portuguese, but they didn't communicate with the kids that way. So even though she heard it a lot, she wasn't the one engaged in conversation, in that duet of communication. And if you are, just like I can think about English, whether they spoke the most correct, highly sophisticated, everything perfect language or not, didn't make any difference, frankly. I learned their form of English. Twin Cities, Minnesota English, and the accent to go with it. And it was around me. So I was surrounded to and communicated to with English. Yeah. Some Yiddish words thrown in. But the actual language structure, sentences, questions, was in English. So I didn't sit down as no one said to me, no, this is a verb, and make sure you don't use this preposition wherever they're not supposed to be. No one ever taught me English in my home that way, but I learned it as a form of expression and hence communication. Now, if someone grows up with music in the house, okay, and I did, but not in a classic way. My parents, my grandparents, who I spent a lot of time with and actually lived with for a while when my parents got divorced, they were very musical people. So what is the language of music? My grandfather was a self-taught violinist. He couldn't, I'm sure if he auditioned, he'd get into a junior high orchestra, maybe. But he could communicate with it. I've said this in other videos before. He would time travel. He'd go back to his native Poland. I witnessed it. What would happen to him? And go through different events of his life. My grandmother could sing and take my headache away. She was actually naturally extremely gifted in healing through sound. My dad, too, in a different kind of way. But he could sing beautifully, totally untrained. My mom sang so spirited, and she used to talk about how she was tone deaf. But you know what? Didn't make any difference to me. I wasn't thinking, gosh, I wish you could get that third higher. It was a part of the frequencies and interactions of everyone. Even in regular speaking, in our house, we had a very large dynamic range, a very large emotional expression range. And so I grew up, I consider in that way, an extremely expressive home. My dad was also a very fine artist. He worked with pastels. Not for a living, not for a career at all. And so you would think that music as a language, as the expressive medium that it is, would not be presented to someone in a, here's dough. Now we're gonna sit with a fixed dough, okay? That kind of music theory. And now you're going to the third when you go, row, row, row your boat. That's the third. The third note is the third. Isn't that convenient? Or immediately put on the Sound of Music for someone so they can go, do, a deer, a female deer, re, right? And just start getting the idea that way, which is kind of a cool way to learn that. It sticks with you when you have music. But when we start training people in an academic, this is a, before they're filled with what is something that gets in them, and they have to express it in a certain kind of way, and sometimes that's could be song. That could be song. That could be variations on rhythm, pitch, and timbre coming together. Please shut that door. I told you not to do that. And they wouldn't be laughing at the same time, believe me. Or my mother. Oh, God bless her soul. She was so great. And when it's time for me to come in the house, I wanted to stick my head in the sand. The sun was still outside. You know, kids are getting in the height of hide and go seek and kick the can. And I hear this, Normie. And I I was so mad. I was beyond belief. Just beyond screaming my head off. That's why when I got the trombone, I put every emotion I had into it. Every single one I could feel. Even before I knew how to play it. And I just got it. So, how do you teach someone theory, language? I'm not sure, for me, that music is theory. And I think most people would do that. I'm sure Susanna would agree with that. But it would be an analytical aspect and a system of identifying certain features of harmonic structure and notes as a language naturally is. So if someone's speaking to you, hey, every time you hit that F sharp, it's a little bit low, okay? And if you're playing trombone, it's probably a bit sharp because that fifth position is kind of feels like neither here nor there. And it's sometimes probably easy not to go out far enough for it. Especially my arms were really short. I had to have a special extension built, okay? So, to listen to someone play would really help that whole process along. I didn't have anyone playing for me. I just played until I had my first lesson. I was really beyond hungry to get it. And I remember, hit this note, and you look at the paper, and now it's B flat. And that came pretty easily to me. And that note goes here, and that note goes here, and that note goes there. Okay. But music itself is not theory. It's not, I wouldn't say the language of music is music theory. I understand, but I think the divide comes even inside of that question to say there was something about, that I felt when, how do you help kids understand? Before we get to the level of understand, and she's asking, how do you get them to understand theory language of music as fluently as their first language? I'll get back to the fact that in a natural way, unless you're around people that are speaking in those terms and naturally playing those terms, and you're getting certain harmonic things in your mind, and you're around people teaching it and all this stuff, and maybe a parent sits you down and goes da 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 da, and has a way of, and then this is a this and this is a that and this is the key of this and blah blah blah. I think at a young age, that can really be absorbed pretty quickly, especially if someone has a proneness themselves. And just because you come from a family of musicians doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have an aptitude that's going to be unusually good, even though it can happen a lot of times. But just by being around it, you kind of get the knack. So eventually, someone, a kid, I think to just be around music and not have them worry about theory. That would be my way. And then eventually, oh yeah, that's a this note, that's a that note. But man, give someone a field to discover things. The sandbox of sound, and playing with this and playing with that. So they can have some freedom before all of a sudden correction comes in. Now in my house, no one was correcting my English. And, I'm not so sure it's that phenomenal now, in classic type of way. I feel I can still communicate what I'm trying to say. Maybe I wouldn't do good on a test. So is music a test? Or do we make it that way? Because an audition is certainly a test. So that's a curious thing, and I think sometimes it's a flaw in our educational system that we don't really put in the big part of the art at the same time someone's trying to do little bits. Some people might only be able to handle, oh yeah, I know that's C, and I know this is this. Other people need a much broader palette. So I'm not putting one better than the other. So it's very individual as well, isn't it? And the profundity of the question is, do we want to take art and immediately put it into a classification system? I think exposing people to different kinds of music can be great. I know my mother had this record of African music from a tribe recorded their music. We would listen to it and start doing our own dances with it. I must have been 9. And we were having a great time just doing all this stuff to the rhythm and jumping up and down. And I just loved it, And so when we introduce someone to something, do we let them have their time with it before we put our thing on it and then on them? And that's what I think would be very important for children. Because a lot of times in this age of, now let's get ready to go to preschool, let's get ready to go to kindergarten, now people think, okay, there's preschool and grade school and then middle school and high school and undergraduate and then graduate and then doctorate. I mean, we're indoctrinated to think we have to go through that whole thing of education. Really? Really? That's a big topic. Big topic. What is art? What about the art that's waiting to be discovered? Because, of course, a concert is a specific type of situation, which for me at this point, I need more behind it than I'm just going to go to a concert. Now, that's not saying incredible things can't happen just going to a concert, okay? I understand. But music has an extraordinary purpose and can do many things, from increasing the well-being of someone's physical health to having their thinking process be sharper. Okay? To heightening different senses, to balancing internal organs, to bring someone to a place that maybe they've never been before, and hopefully of the more elevated kind. There's enough tragedy, hardship, darkness in the world that I think music's potency at this point would be to elevate it beyond that. And actually, as a great mentor of mine said, it might be one of the only ways to really get on in rough times. And I find myself very into that. I can change my state, I can change my timings, I can change my fluidity, I can change my actions because of using rhythm, pitch, and timbre. And everyone knows you're already doing a certain kind of music, aren't you? When you see the young child or the young baby, how are you speaking to it? What's the nature of your voice? What are the rhythms? What are the timbres? When you want to make them sleep or encourage the sleeping. What kind of rhythm, pitch, and timbre of your attitude and basic process of life do you want to resonate inside of their acoustic? This is the language of music for me. And so I loved working with kids. In times I'd worked with kindergartens and first grade and a little older while my son was in school, and I'd go to his class and I just looked at all those lives and went, what note are they going to turn out to be on the great orchestra or in the great orchestra of humanity? What chord are they going to strike? Interesting thoughts. So the language of music, that would be the first thought. And to have it be a natural part of living For it's no different than life. And yes, you have to show someone, here's the way to hold this, here's the way to do that. But when we're teaching someone that, what else gets transferred besides the information? Well, your attitude is going to get transferred. Your patience and lack thereof will show up. Are you going to demand certain things from them with their music? Or you just let it happen and see if that's where they need to be. A lot could be talked about in this, but I'm going to leave it there. And happy holidays in advance, everyone. I'm sure I'll be putting out an end of the year video in a week's time.